My name is Casey Thomas, and I listen to Progress Texas because it's the best place to go to get accurate state and local information.
It's Monday, July 13th, 2026, and this is the Progress Texas Daily Dispatch, rapid response on the breaking news stories Texas progressives need to know. I'm Chris Mosier. Progress Texas amplifies progressive values, leaders, and actions through our No Paywall podcasts and digital media. We make Texas politics easy to understand and to participate in, and your support for fact-based independent media hands the mic to millions of Texans. Huge thanks to Gary Kutak, Norma Jane Lestracco, and John Oberlin for their ongoing sustaining support. Much appreciated. The countdown to the November midterm election has reached 113 days. At this point, that seems like both a long ways off and also practically tomorrow. Central to the watching and waiting, meanwhile, is the theorizing about which way independent voters will swing. And by independent voters, I'm including Republicans who voted for John Cornyn in the primary and are now faced with the unthinkable option of pushing a button for Ken Paxton, or for some, the even more difficult prospect of voting for a Democrat, even at a moment when high-quality Democratic statewide nominees extend down the ballot. Alejandro Serrano at the Texas Tribune is curious about that looming and historic choice, too. He talked to 9 of those Cornyn primary voters, and they fell into a neat pattern of 3 each in 3 different camps, 3 defectors who represent a significant subset of traditional and moderate Republicans who prioritize free markets, and borderland Republicans concerned about the full range of immigration factors. They plan to break rank and vote for Democratic nominee James Tallarico for Senate. These voters also cite Paxton's personal scandals and ethical shortcomings as having crossed a moral line that for them overrides partisan alignment. Next, there are the 3 disenfranchised abstainers who find themselves fully alienated by both of their options, with Paxton as too corrupt and Tallarico too progressive. All 3 plan to either skip the Senate race entirely or cast a protest vote for a third-party candidate. And finally, there are the 3 partisan loyalists representing core GOP activists and right-of-center voters who plan to back Ken Paxton without regard to his baggage, remaining driven by strict GOP and Trump loyalty, an aversion to losing their grip on power in both Washington and Austin, and a deep-seated personal ideological opposition to all things Democrat. That seems like a tie. 3 for the Dems, 3 for the Republicans, 3 on the sidelines. But remember, these are all historically Republican voters. Should these results play out with any accuracy across the Republican electorate this November, we could be looking at a great day for Democrats. And while we're admiring this half-full political glass, let's mull a new survey from the U.S. Hispanic Business Council that Samuel Benson at Politico says reveals that the draconian interior immigration enforcement and aggressive tariff agendas of the Trump administration have severely disrupted the Texas economy and thus have led to a further fracturing of the state's conservative voter base, especially in South Texas. This new poll finds that 1 in 5 Hispanic business owners in Texas has endured the deportation of at least one critical employee over the past year, while an overwhelming 70% of those Latino-owned businesses report having been financially harmed by federal tariffs. Donald Trump's aggressive enforcement strategy, which has swept up community members and devastated workplace morale, has spawned a pervasive environment of fear across the Hispanic majority communities of Texas that directly threatens the small businesses in those communities, affecting particularly the vital construction sector. Further, the poll indicates that all of this disruption is underlying a substantial and rapidly developing political realignment. James Tallarico now leads Ken Paxton by 7 points among the influential Latino business owners of Texas, with about 1/4 of those who voted for John Cornyn saying they now intend to vote this November for James Tallarico, and another 1/4 saying they're undecided and may abstain from the Senate vote altogether. Only half of the surveyed Texas Latino entrepreneurs who voted for Cornyn say they remain committed to Ken Paxton. This is an interesting bit from the weekend from Chasen Gordon at the Houston Chronicle, who writes on a recent study into the words most frequently Googled across the country, which reveals an interesting divergence here in Texas. The word gaslighting is the top search definition across most of the country these days, but surprise, Texas stands alone once again as the word republic is our most frequent query. This digital curiosity may reflect upon our distinct history as an independent sovereign nation from 1836 to 1846, the decade following the breakaway from Mexico, during which Texas encompassed vast territories stretching way up into modern-day Oklahoma and Colorado. Or one might hypothesize that our fascination and curiosity about the term republic might intersect with that common conservative argument that you see from MAGA trolls online all the time, insisting that America is a republic and not a democracy. One wonders how many gave up that thinly veiled anti-democracy angle when they learned from their Googling session that a republic is simply a specific form of democracy, a representative democracy where citizens exercise sovereign power through elected officials rather than direct voting on every law. If they actually picked a good source from their search results, our red-hatted friends, diligently and digitally doing their own research, would have discovered that the principles of James Madison, father of the Constitution, hold that a constitutional republic relies entirely on democratic mechanisms to function, rendering right-wing arguments against democracy in favor of unfettered legislative or executive power a meaningless and false distinction. And finally today, y'all, Lindsey Graham, whom it turns out died of an aortic dissection, a tear in the main artery leaving the heart over this weekend. Molly Wilhelm at the Houston Chronicle outlines the outpouring of praise for the suddenly late senator from the expected cast of conservative characters from Ted Cruz to Wesley Hunt to Michael McCall, all of whom recall Graham as a fearless patriot, a giant in the Senate, and a, quote, fierce advocate for American national security, unquote, that from Ted Cruz, and presumably related to Graham's threat just within the last week or so to obliterate the 9 million people who live in Iran if their government doesn't bend the knee to Donald Trump. For a lot of folks, though, a long-running question about Senator Graham returned to the forefront this weekend, and that is, after all, was he or was he not gay? For me, I'll side with the folks representing the LGBTQ plus community, including a really nice post on Sunday morning from former Austin City Council member Jimmy Flanagan, who have said that if Lindsey Graham was gay, what a sad thing for a person who could have been a tremendous advocate for gay rights to have remained closeted all the way to the end. But whether he was or wasn't gay, Senator Graham did have a tremendous impact on gay life in America over his long career as a lawmaker. For instance, in 1996, while serving in the House, Lindsey Graham co-sponsored the Defense of Marriage Act, which sought to undermine same-sex marriage rights by establishing a federal definition of marriage as allowed only between one man and one woman. Decades later, after the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage across the country, Congress moved to protect those new families via the Respect for Marriage Act of 2022. Graham voted against it, claiming he was worried that allowing gay folks to get married would infringe upon the religious liberties of individuals and organizations who didn't want them to. Senator Graham voted in favor of a constitutional amendment to ban same-sex marriage in 2006, and early in his Senate career, Graham voted against expanding federal hate crimes legislation to cover offenses motivated by a victim's actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity. In 2010, he voted against the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, opposing the policy change that allowed LGBTQ Americans to serve openly in the U.S. Armed Forces. In 2013, Senator Graham voted against the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, an effort to outlaw workplace discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. Throughout his tenure as a lawmaker, Lindsey Graham consistently declined to support the Equality Act, which seeks to add LGBTQ protections to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So, was Lindsey Graham a self-hating closet case or just a dedicated lifelong bachelor? At this point, we may never know, but ultimately, what really counts is on the record, and the record shows that Senator Lindsey Graham, throughout his career as a lawmaker, with steadfast and dogged determination, did just about all he could to make life worse for LGBTQ plus Americans. Our web store is live and ready for you to grab the merch to match your progressive values right now at ProgressTexas.org. We've got newly released Humans Against Abbott, Y'all Means All, and Resist shirts, stickers, and buttons at the web store at ProgressTexas.org to support your favorite podcast network today. That's the Progress Texas Daily Dispatch for this Monday, July 13th, 2026. Links to all these original stories can be found in our show notes. When lies in Texas are well funded by the far right, your support for fact-based reporting is needed and appreciated. I'm Chris Mosier. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great day and a great week. We'll see you again right here tomorrow morning.